Hello and welcome to today's webinar in Knowledge Miles. That's the lectures associated with the 695th Lord Mayor of London. In this series, we address the connections in and around the square mile, what the current Lord Mayor Michael Magnelli calls the world's coffee house, and how these connections might help us tackle future global challenges. Today's lecture has an amazingly comprehensive title, The Real High Flyers, Migrating with Birds and Other Animals and Why They Matter to the City of London, Our Supply Chains and Our Future, and is presented for us by an organisation called Conservation Without Borders. My name's Richard Harvey. I'll be convening this session and moderating the question and answer portion of today's lecture. If you're curious, I am a Professor of Computer Science at the University of East Anglia, and I'm a former Gresham College professor, hence the connection with the City of London. Before we get started, a bit of housekeeping. My job is just to get out of the way, really. This is the agenda for today. But without further ado, let me introduce our two speakers for today's lecture, the first of whom is Sacha Dench, who is the CEO of Conservation Without Borders. You can check her out on Wikipedia or on the Conservation Without Borders website. And our other speaker is Ben Goldsmith, who also has an extensive Wikipedia page. But I think he's currently devoting some time to being CEO at Manhattan Resource Efficiency PLC. Now, here's the problem. Both of them have CVs as long as my arm, and I could spend a lot of time blowing smoke up them and telling you how bleeding brilliant they both are. But in these talks, we follow the culture of the City of London, which is brevity, brevity, brevity. So that's enough from me. Over to you, Sacha.
Thank you very much indeed. And yeah, for the opportunity to share a story. What we are hoping to do today is to, I guess, make a case for much greater collaboration between conservation and conservation scientists and industry, in particular the City of London. I can start off, if you can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so yeah, there's some pretty grim statistics about the state of nature in a lot of places, including the fact that we've lost over half a billion birds in 40 years. 97% of migratory fish species are on the verge of extinction. But it's to the point where it's affecting and can affect our economies by the fact that the World Economic Forum's Global Risk Report in 2024 ranked loss of biodiversity and ecosystem collapse, ranked it as the third biggest threat the world will face a decade from now. So I guess that's kind of in a several statistics question of why should we all care, but I want to make a case for the fact that these challenges are also potentially a big opportunity, and that essentially the migrating birds are or could be considered massive migrating canaries in the coal mines, and yeah, hence make a case for the need for much bigger and potentially a new kind of collaboration for nature, inspired by one of our patrons, potentially a kind of MI5 or MI6 for nature. But can you next slide, please? I want to start it off by giving you a bit of a sample of why I do the kind of expeditions that I do. Having lost our family home in the big Australian bushfires, exacerbated vastly by climate change, I had to ask myself why, whether or not the idea of looking at the world through the eyes of migratory birds was really worthwhile. And so what I realized, though, looking at the map of the world's flyways, was that what you get with looking at the world through the eyes of birds is not only that different lens, but also the migratory flyways of the world kind of break the world up into segments like that of an orange, which allow, and all of those cause us to focus on challenges that the world is facing, environmental challenges, but on a scale we can almost get our heads around. Trying to wrap our heads around solving them on a global scale is quite a challenge, but flyways connect people at different levels of development, different languages, different cultures, very different environments. And each flyway, for those of you who aren't birders, basically are the routes that birds fly between the northern climes and warmer, more southern latitudes, and then down to the Arctic. So to give you a first little sample of it, I want to start with giving you a sample of what it's like to fly with me from the Russian Arctic to the UK, trying to help save the Buick swan, a species in rapid decline. We'd lost almost half of them from different threats. since about the 1980s. So for a second, sit back and imagine you're flying with me and the birds about 500 feet in the air above the beautiful swirling colours of a treeless Arctic tundra. The benefit of the paramotor, amongst many others, is that you have unhindered views in all directions. So you look down past your dangling feet at the beautiful swirling colours and you notice that there are occasional swan families down there. There's still plenty of plants there for them to eat. Look around and constantly on the lookout for skewers that could take bird eggs or anything from bears, wolves or polar bears, any of the predators that might be interested in swans or you, and you make a note of whether the numbers are expanding. And then you look across big flocks of swans on migration, but hang on a second, there are swans and geese flying together, and up in these parts of the Arctic, most of the geese are legal quarry, and they're much louder than the swans, so perhaps that's some of the reason why so many of the birds have shot in their tissues. And at one point, lucky enough, two birds fly closer and closer and closer, and just as you're about to turn to take evading action, two of them tuck in behind your right wingtip and fly along with you, as though you are the lead bird. And just for a few moments, you feel like the lead bird in the flock, a literal human swan. And how did people respond to me landing in different communities? A key thing was to understand why shooting, for example, was happening up there. How would people respond to me, this big blonde flying woman? They didn't shoot at me as I landed to talk about swans, as many people thought they would, or be aggressive. They basically grab a hold of you, drag you inside, wrap you in reindeer skins, and eventually ask something like, did you really fly all the way there just to talk to us about swans? And with the curiosity of why I care so much, they want to know more. And for many, the idea of flying with swans might seem like a nice stunt, a good way of raising attention, but it did much, much more than that. So whilst flying with the birds and arriving from out the sky was a great way for engaging people and media, it gives you far more powerful insights. For example, fly over an area of land and you get a good idea of the extent of land clearance, the potential for natural corridors for nature, whether they're green corridors or blue, and what chance could nature recovery have here. From the ground, also, a wall of trees could seem like a forest, but from the air, you can see if it's actually wafer thin. And if you examine the waterways, particularly choosing to fly soon after rain, you can very clearly see the pollution inputs. Land slightly short of an agreed destination, and you instead meet random members of the community for a much more honest and unfiltered opinions of what people think, not necessarily the well-curated story someone might have planned, helping you to build a better picture. And land and look exhausted and a little bit pathetic, and people's guards are down. They wonder why you go to such lengths for a bird, and somehow they eventually want to help you. I'm on a few slides on. I'm so sorry, Jacopo. I've moved on for several slides now. Can you go to slide 10? It's a slide of a big wetland, yeah. And that one will do, yeah, that's fine. Land slightly short, yeah, and you meet random members of a community, etc. Okay, the next slide. Start your interactions with people by telling stories of adventure from your own eyes or from those of a bird, and you get a great sense of awe that triggers chemicals in the brain that are known to open people's minds to the idea of collaboration, getting yourself out of the idea of self and much more thinking about the world as a whole. Next slide. The other thing we get from expeditions is that you camp out on site with where the locals are working and living, and you get to see the realities of life and the real struggles they face. Had I not, for example, been camping in a Gambian reserve, we would never have experienced firsthand the challenges of a small conservation organisation trying to deal with a global issue like bird flu. But I will share that with you in a minute. Next slide. So the key is, did the Swan expedition work, flying along with migratory birds, speaking to people all along the flyway? Well, the first major count after that expedition was the first time in over 30 years the numbers of swans that decline seem to have halted. Not only halted, but they actually seem to be on the increase. And why did that help? Was it the mass media support? So we had, thousands of media stories and different publications in all the countries along the flyway. yes, undoubtedly, our perception of nature, how popular it is, how lovable it is critical to whether we will decide something is worth saving or not. And also the public response to sharing that kind of information was incredible as well. People sent in pictures of threats that they'd seen, where numbers had changed, where a wetland had disappeared, for example. It helped us to build a much bigger picture, but that wasn't enough. The really big impact you could see happened where industries, big and small, many of whom had no idea of their impact, or they had an idea of their impact, but not the scale of it, or hadn't been invited into a room with an opportunity to actually come up with the solutions themselves. When they were given that opportunity, the changes they could bring about were, in fact, I think, where all of the impact happened. And I want to give you a few more examples of that. Given time constraints, I'm going to give you a few small examples. One of those, can I flick to the next slide, please? One of those, we're a group of fish farms. Obviously, wetlands are disappearing at a vast rate, and we need to bring them back. But on this particular occasion, a group of wetlands had been accosted for fish farms, and the fish farms were drained every year, and so were not available for swans to roost on en route. When the conservationists had assumed that that was not changeable, but when asked to engage, the fish farmers basically said, well, the simple thing they can do is drain the wetlands, drain those ponds a month later. So they were at least there and available for the swans. They had no idea that that could have been an impact. So that's one example. Can you flick to the next slide, please, briefly, and then press next again, because I think there's a couple of slides missing. Next. Okay, another example is up in the Russian Arctic. Where hunting had been we'd known as an issue for many years. Once we'd engaged the hunters in a way that they became collaborators, the solutions they came up with for tackling hunting were different and so much more impactful and worked so much faster than ours could ever have done. Can you go to the next slide, please? Another example was a community in Estonia who had been complaining about the loss of tens and hundreds of swans actually along a particular stretch of power lines. The power company, I think, had just said to them it's too expensive to bury them. But once they'd realised actually that the numbers of swans talking about was globally significant, was actually having a major impact on the numbers of birds. By collaborating, they are now, not only are many of the lines gone, but they'll all be buried by the end of this year. And zone could be enough to change the trajectory of a whole population. So can I go to the next slide, please? So yes, obviously people care about swans. People within companies care about swans. I actually don't need to play this video. You can go to the next slide, Jacopo. Thank you very much. I want to give you a couple of really specific examples of how the connection between birds and supply chains, and another reason why that should connect. So basically, we know that people care about saving birds, but can companies really care about the same thing? So I'll use a couple of examples from an expedition we did from Scotland down into West Africa. It was turned into a radio series called Flight of the Ospreys, which some of you may have seen. Can you go to the next slide, please? So on that expedition, on one example, we happened to be in Gambia, camping out with the locals, and saw what happens when bird flu hits the country, and the delivery of all the global action plans ends up falling basically on a handful of conservationists, relatively under-resourced conservationists. We found ourselves, first of all, hearing a conversation where they were looking for how they were going to find enough money for fuel for the sorts of travel they were needing to do in order to deal with the outbreak on the scale it had. So they didn't have funds for the fuel. There were struggles with tourism being shut down, which needed to happen because tourism was the only income for a country like Gambia, and they had a month left of tourism. And what that meant was that the announcements were coming slow, and we watched as on social media people were posting pictures of going and picking up sick birds and taking them home to try and heal them, and it doesn't take much to understand the challenges and the human impacts that could have. They also didn't have nearly enough PPE. They were given a small supply, but not enough to the scale they were dealing with. So they started sharing it. One person would have a mask, another the trousers, another the gloves. It was not enough. And we struggled to get them new supplies. Thankfully, Maersk, the shipping company, ended up stepping up to help them. They also could have done with some expertise briefly. And there are international systems for stepping in when there's a humanitarian disaster, but this didn't quite fit. So we couldn't tap into any of those. Basically, if industry had been able to collaborate much faster with conservation, we could have made this much easier. And why should we care about something like bird flu in the Gambia? Well, bird flu travels up and down the coast, up and down that entire flyway, all the way to the UK and to countries which are sources of routes of many of our supply chains. It affects tourism, it affects agriculture, it affects our meat supplies, it affects water quality, other wildlife, and even potentially human health. So it's a really clear example of where improved global collaboration, perhaps some kind of an MI6 for nature, working in the background to make fast change, could have had a much better outcome. Let me take a second small example. Can you go to the next slide, please? In Morocco, we following the bird migration, there's some fantastic plans there to build renewable energy. There's vast areas of the desert for where a 12,000 hectare plan for wind and solar energy is in the planning, and potentially brilliant. But traveling through Morocco, you can see that a previous scheme, not dissimilar, which also had to build power lines, had catastrophic consequences, which keep going on. And you can see why, but you probably need to go there to be able to see why. In the desert, if you build a load of pylons, which you need to move the energy, you are essentially building, from a bird's point of view, trees. And every tide migratory bird, and most of them are channeled, as you would have seen from that first map, right down in a narrow channel. And any migratory bird, either at night when there's no longer thermals or in a sandstorm, would see that as a place for respite and land on it. If you build your power lines, your pylons along a waterway, which is very practical, every hungry bird will also land on it, whether that's using it as a perch for hunting small mammals or for hunting a fish like the UK's beloved osprey. But build them badly, and the vast majority of those birds could be electrocuted. And on the line we walked along, there are plenty of examples of that. The locals pick up hundreds of them. We found a bird's leg at the time. So people care again, but why should companies care about supply chains and losing birds? Well, obviously that's an example that we need to tackle. We shouldn't be. There's plenty of incredible best practices being developed by NGOs around the world. The UN publishes that, but it's not being put into place. I'm sure that there are great solutions for that. But does it also affect supply chains? Well, if you think about one of the major birds that are impacted by things like this are the vultures. And the vultures are incredibly vulnerable to electrocution. And their roles in places like Africa, at the root of many of our supply chains, are very clear to see. They remove carrion waste, even human waste. They protect ecosystems, water quality, human health, and stability. And unstable human communities, as we know, can lead to conflict, can lead to migration. And of course, through all of that, can lead to the upset of our supply chains. So yeah, next slide, please. Here we go, just a vulture in action, dealing with carrion at one of the countries in West Africa. Okay, so coming to an end, I want to just quickly flick to the challenge that we all have. Can you flick to the next slide again, please? So basically, I think I've tried to show briefly from the very beginning that change is possible with collaboration, and as long as people are brought together in the right way. There are many collaborations going on, but from the statistics, we can see that we are not winning. We, as Conservation Without Borders, will keep on doing more expeditions, because the picture that we can paint through the collaborations with people, through all the other insights, are invaluable. But I have decided that we need something much bigger. We need to try potentially something different. And being inspired by our patron Judy, we have wondered whether something like an MI5 for MI6 for nature is what we need. It brings together scientists and companies much closer, yes, with funding, but also to understand systems and enact solutions. I've found inevitably that when we have really good collaborations, that solutions that we come up with are much more powerful than the ones conservationists, largely driven by ecologists, can come up with alone. Conservation NGOs are trying hard, doing a great job, but they don't have all the tools. The UN are doing an incredible job of bringing people together, developing best practice, but they, by their very nature, cannot act fast enough. And quite often what I found is that conservationists assume that companies and industries are too big to shift, and so are almost unwilling to try. There's also commonly a belief that systems problems are too complicated to solve, and companies don't like change, or the way that industries work are too hard to change. But I think that the people within them can actually do anything if they want to. And if we look at the kind of numbers and hopefully the connections between the disappearance of wildlife that we can see and the state of all of our industries, we don't really have a choice. So I think it's really important, but I also think we have an incredible opportunity. So with that in mind, can you go to the next slide, please? Joanna Lumley has agreed to help us bring together on May 23rd to see what we can make happen. We're particularly going to start looking at the world through the lens of the vultures, particularly because of the really critical role that they play and the examples we've got around the world. In India, where 99.9 something % of vulture population disappeared, it cost billions in funds and many, many thousands of human lives. So we have an example of directly how the loss of an animal like the vulture will affect us. As I said before, we've also looking at things through the lens of a flyway. I've found really, really useful. Not only for the fact that the birds give us interesting insights into the state of nature, but also for the scale at which they act. It's a scale that the human brain I think, can get their head around. So as a closing, I want to admit that I had no particular interest in swans or even in birds in particular. I used to be a marine turtle biologist. Before I decided to fly with the swans. What I was inspired by actually was a group of scientists and conservation organizations that I saw putting everything they had into trying to save birds. They ended up giving me a gift. I would see it as a gift of a way that I thought I could help. They sent me off on a journey discovering parts of the world, meeting passionate people, and leaving me with something I can hold forever, which is knowing that I could just have helped save a species. And so with this talk, I'd like to essentially be giving all of you a similar gift, a chance to have a look at how you could have similar impact, but in a different way. So every one of you that are leaders of companies or of industry, you have resources, you have knowledge, you have influence, you have brilliant staff that could come up with different solutions that most ecologists and conservationists would not. You also have experience of needing to show rapid results and impact. And if there is anything that conservation needs right now, it is just that. So we hope that some of you will want to join us on May 23. Over to you, Ben.
Well, I think we're into questions now, aren't we? Because we agreed we would do questions for the last 20 minutes or so. But it's what a wonderful presentation, Sacha, and you're a hero, and I'm a huge fan of your work.
Ben, do you want to take a few minutes though? I think
a discussion. I think a discussion is perhaps a. I mean, what to say really? I think Sacha's work is completely invaluable. People don't focus on migrating birds. We're all aware of them. Somewhere deep in our consciousness, we're all aware of the changing sounds of the year, even if we can't put a name on it. The return of chiff-chaffs in kind of April. Everyone on some level associates that sound with the return of spring. And migrating birds are the canary in the coal mine because it's just much harder to maintain conditions in which species can survive when they're traveling these vast distances across a whole multiplicity of landscapes. And so they are the first thing to go. And it does need a multinational effort, which isn't happening to the extent that it should. But I think we live in a really exciting moment because people are starting to realize the importance of nature all around us in a way that hasn't been the case previously. People are starting on a practical level to draw the links between, for example, overgrazed hillsides in a national park and repeated flooding every winter in the surrounding towns. People are starting to understand that if you remove nature from landscapes, you suffer the consequences in the form of volatile hydrology, depleted soil, loss of pollinators. But I think on a deeper level, people are starting to understand more than ever before the visceral importance of nature to our lives, to our well-being. There's empirical data from California and Japan, for example, that shows clearly that hospital patients who can just see nature out of their hospital windows get better faster. The Japanese Health Service is now prescribing forest bathing for people with mental and physical difficulties in order to help people get well. So we're starting to understand that we really are nature and nature is us. And therefore, there's a greater clamour on the part of the public to do something about the dire state of the natural environment all around us than I've ever seen in my lifetime. And that's why politicians are responding and exciting things are starting to happen. And it's not just in the realm of policy. In England, agricultural subsidies have been reformed, whereby they're not just dished out willy-nilly according to how much land you've got in a direct disincentive to maintain nature, but environmental subsidies are now the norm. So you only get public money as a farmer now or as a land manager to the extent you're delivering stewardship and restoration of nature. That's a huge change. And imagine that as a kind of great icebreaker ship. Well, there's a flotilla of smaller publicly funded and private schemes following in its wake. Things like natural flood management or nutrient neutrality, whereby water companies are paying landowners to manage their land better because they know that well-managed land with lots of nature on it means a steady supply of clean water. And then there's voluntary carbon, there's regulated biodiversity credits. So there's a huge opportunity now for those who already own land and those who are interested in owning or leasing land to generate a financial return from restoring it to health. Voluntary carbon markets are already the #1 cash contributor to conservation efforts in sub-Saharan Africa. So things are really changing and the money is starting to become available to do it. And I think that's where the opportunity in the City of London lies. For investors to get involved in providing private finance towards restoring nature. And I think it feels a little bit like where renewables were 15 years ago. I remember when my late Uncle Teddy spent a fortune on some solar device that didn't work and he kind of strapped it onto his roof and get plenty of cowboys in the market and dodgy schemes and people signing up to deals that they then couldn't get out of. Well, fast forward 15, 18 years, today solar is by far the cheapest source of power that humanity has ever devised. It's a mainstream asset class for investors. Every single pension fund and insurance company has solar in the portfolio. And I think nature will become that kind of an asset class. And we won't do it if it doesn't. We won't restore nature on the back of philanthropy alone. We need public funding, but we also need private markets to mobilise. So I think we live in an exciting time. What Sacha's doing is not niche, it's at the cutting edge. It's symbolic of what we need to be doing. It's scarcely imaginable a world without migrating birds. Someone showed me an amazing animation the other day of all the migrations that take place each year around the world, sped up. And it looks like a sort of pianola, it looks like music, the back and forth, these patterns. And it's an amazing demonstration of why we find nature mesmerizing. Anyone who sat at the edge of a pond and kind of watched the innumerable little interactions and the kind of patterns overlaid on patterns, it's mesmerizing. We're drawn to it. So I think this migrating birds work that Sacha's doing is really splendid. And I'm grateful to her for her presentation.
Yeah, thanks both. I mean, it's really interesting. You're quite right. During my lifetime, nature's gone from a sort of eccentric hobby to being something that's right at the middle of capital markets. That all this natural capital assets stuff is, farmers in the UK are going to be different sort of people. They're going to be charged and paid for preserving floodplains and other things, I gather. Right, we have some questions.
Yep. And sorry, if I just may on Richard, on that point. I mean, I think one of the reasons why private markets are developing in this area is because of the extraordinary array of poor economic decision making surrounding nature and land use.
Yeah.
We need more than just food from our land. So landscapes that are hopeless for producing food are devoted to producing food, and they don't produce very much of it, and they're wrecked in the process. Think of the Dartmoor or Bodmin, or the Pennines or the Lake District, grazed to death by sheep to produce less than 1% of our national food output on 20% of the land at catastrophic ecological cost. But we also need clean air, we need clean water, we need access to nature, we need pollinating insects, we need effectively the fabric of life to be allowed space in which to thrive. And so because of all the distortions that have been created by government subsidies, in farming and other things, as those start to be reformed, there is a flood of change taking place. That's the principal driver here.
Yeah, good thinking. Well, Sokratul Anubhava comments that concept appeals to me, MI6 for nature. And while you were talking, Sacha, I thought, well, hang on, I thought this was the UK government's international development strategy, and I quickly checked to see whether what you were doing does fall into that, and it does. So I thought, well, it's more like track 3 or track 2 diplomacy. But so my question is your activity the sort of thing that the Foreign and Commonwealth Office is supporting or should be supporting? I mean, you're both making the case that farmers in some distance from us can have a big impact on our lives. That sounds like something that foreign policy should be dealing with, doesn't it?
Sacha, go ahead.
No, I was going to say absolutely. We definitely have some interactions. I think what the concept for the MI6, MI5 for nature have come about from wanting basically to pull strengths and ideas and capability and network and influence from the more places possible. And the private sector, I have had massive success with. There's just a lot more untapped potential there, but absolutely.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. So we have some factual questions from Tessa Kershaw. She says, well, what suggestions did the Arctic hunters come up with? You said that you'd had a dialogue with them, but you didn't quite say what they proposed.
And if I'd done that, I would have given Ben even less time. I'm sorry about that. So they were the ones that first said the Russian rule book is very confusing. They have their own red book, and so it's not clear from all of those that the swans were protected. They basically also came up with things like, hunters here don't believe you know how to count them across Europe. You must be making it up because the swans are spread out over much area. So we need to basically let them know. You need why. They need to be able to ask basic questions like, are they really protected? Are they really declining? How do you count them? They also so they came up with the idea of getting information sent out with the 50,000 hunting licenses that were given out. That happened. So there were many. The Nanette's community said we now have at least one person in every community has a satellite phone, so we could be having a young representative from each of the communities involved. And we can't completely stop all hunting. They also helped me identify the fact that some of the hunters we were talking about are 9 years old. So the bigger context of who the hunters are, the difference between the Nanette's hunters who hunt in the season and the ones who come from further south, and they are basically hunting for Instagram. So they want to shoot 100 birds. So they're two very, very different markets. Those who want an Instagram photo of 100 birds behind them, and some of them want 100 white birds in a picture behind them. But we would never have known that sitting in our conservation offices or going out on occasional trips.
So sorry, you just said something quite unusual there. So there are 9-year-olds who want to shoot 100 swans.
No, sorry, they are separate. Some young in some communities, young people start hunting for their families at 9 years old. Another group of hunters are those that would come from afar, and they're there for a hunting holiday, and they want photos for Instagram.
Oh, it's like a sort of bird punt, when they used to shoot vast numbers of ducks.
Well, I think they were at least for eating. These ones aren't for eating, which is what incensed more.
Yeah, it's not quite surprising to a Western mind, that, I think. Tessa also asks, how are the pylons in Morocco built so badly as to cause the birds to be electrocuted? I mean, we see birds on power lines all the time in England, don't we? Or is
There's
that
quite
what you say?
They just were. They were built uninsulated, so they kill lots of birds. There are challenges with the ways they are built and lots of different designs. And there's a process for building power lines, which basically is sensitivity mapping, which starts off looking at where are the birds moving, what are the species there, what are their wingspan, and what's their kind of behaviours, and all of those things can determine what is the best type of power line to build, the best kind of construction. But there are some that are just still being built substandard. I have had an amazing response from people in the energy industry looking at where are the issues, because there's techniques being built. We all want renewable energy, we want it, but it's quite often just not being deployed in the way we want. And I found some quite tangible solutions for that. Many of those have come from speaking to people actually in the industry, not decision makers. And Bankers for Net Zero have agreed to host a group in a Chatham House conversation around what the solutions could be. But that's a perfect example of where input from industry in a space which is collaborative, I think, can lead us to much faster change than it can do by ordinary means.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm an engineer by training, and I was just racking my brains thinking of when was I ever given any guidance on designing for nature.
That is exactly what one of the, a technical person, an engineer within one of the power companies said, surely that should be standard. One of our standard compulsory annual health and safety training sessions is what's the latest best practice in building, in constructing to avoid the damage to birds and wildlife, because that does change. There is new insights all the time, and yeah.
I've never been given any guidance, I think, in my area, so that's not good, is it? Now Clive Bullen, he's got a puzzling question. Actually, I'm going to give it to you as it's written, and you see if you can interpret it. Isn't eating wild birds healthier for us than eating mass-produced factory-bred birds? Hence, isn't it a bigger, healthier solution needed? I'm not quite sure what to make of that question. Is the proposal that we
why don't I
go for it?
Yeah, why don't I chip in? Certainly when it comes to deer, the suggestion is absolutely right. You know, that we've got a massive overpopulation of deer in the United Kingdom. We don't have any predators. We've eliminated the lynx and the wolves. Deer numbers are increasing at 20% a year, and we need to be shooting something like 600,000 or 800,000 deer a year in order just to keep the population level. So, and it's ecologically catastrophic, and ultimately we will reintroduce predators because there's no other way. You know, in America and Europe, it's never been shown that humans are able to stay on top of these animals once you remove equilibrium by killing off all the apex predators. But for the time being, eating wild venison is absolutely the most sustainable meat you can eat. I'm not sure the same holds true of birds, just because the numbers of birds has collapsed, you know, catastrophically across all species, pretty much. You know, I mean, wood pigeons, I suppose, but there certainly wouldn't be enough of them to make a meaningful dent in the provision of protein. But I mean, eyewitness accounts of the Somerset levels 200 years ago, you know, the skies used to darken for kind of hours or days on end, with sort of rivers of migrating birds overhead. You know, we now go through the Somerset levels, you see the odd pair of mallard, you know, but really the kind of abundance that was known by our ancestors is almost unfathomable to us today. And we need to do everything we can to restore that abundance. And it does come back very quickly if you give it a chance. I mean, just to pluck one random example, you know, the restoration of the Altan Dala, which is the Golden Steppe in Kazakhstan, which is overseen by Frankfurt Zoological Society and the OSPB. You know, it's a rewilding project almost the size of Germany, where they're restoring Saiga antelope and kulan, the wild ass, and the goal ultimately is to restore cheetahs there. Well, the success is such that the Saiga antelope has increased from 50,000 individuals to 2 million individuals in around a decade. So nature, you know, when you establish a marine protected area, you get these incredible hockey stick increases in life. Same is true of birds and migrating birds. And right now, everything needs to point towards restoring that abundance. And so I don't think that wild birds can make much of an impact, no. But I agree with the question that the factory farming of livestock is one of the great evils of the modern era. Taking sentient animals and locking them away indoors in confinement. With distorted genetics, so they grow too fast and can't even stand up, and stuffing them with antibiotics to keep them alive in these conditions. I mean, it's a hideosity that future generations will look back on with utter horror. And so I think less meat, better meat. Sustainably produced meat. And I think for the cheap stuff, the stack it high, sell it cheap stuff, I can't help it. I hope that alternative proteins and plant-based alternatives knock them out of business. The kind of patties and kind of, cheap pork sausages and milk powder and egg powder and all that stuff. I hope they can precision ferment it like we do with insulin, because factory farming is one of the most revolting inventions of humanity.
Final question. Richard Pears points out that UK GDP could fall 12% due to nature degradation, according to the Green Finance Institute. What does Ben think of their approach to bring nature into our economic thinking? And are the capital markets ready to deal with the value at risk that their analysis highlights? So it might be a cruel question because you might not have read that report.
Not at all. I mean, 12% seems optimistic to me. I mean, if we suffer real ecological collapse, I think 100% is more likely. I'm not a doom monger, but everything that we have and everything that we love and everything that we do is directly subsidiary to the natural world around us. And therefore, we've got to figure out how to reinsert ourselves into it, creating as little friction as possible, because we've sort of taken ourselves outside of it and we're plundering it, and it's not working. Abundance continues to be lost. Now, there is no farming if you lose the topsoil. There is no farming or there isn't much farming if you lose pollinating insects. So we have to take nature into account. But I think the number one and most important step is to remove perverse incentives, because the market has a way of leading us in the right direction. Solar defeated coal because it's cheaper and easier and better. That's why the value of coal stocks is down 90% in the last 7 years. It's because there isn't much of a future in coal in a world where you can generate power from solar panels that are cheaper than window frames. And similarly, as fish run out in the sea, fishing is simply not economic in the high seas, but we subsidize it with $35 billion of taxpayers' money every year to help build more and bigger and faster ships with bigger tech to chase down the very last fish. Well, that's a mad distortion. We shouldn't be subsidizing the fishing industry in that way. Similarly, in agriculture, $700 billion a year of subsidies for farming, which make it viable to farm places that aren't suitable for farming, places that should be wetlands or mountainsides. These are places that are, should be farmed very lightly, if at all. A few cattle to produce some high quality beef in the Lake District is all you need, and you get an extraordinary recovery of nature. But instead, we whip every square inch like a little donkey in a brick mine, in a brick factory, because people are subsidized to do. So I think the market will provide answers if government subsidies are brought out of the way.
Great. Time has caught us out as usual. Just a brief look at some of the lectures that are coming up, which you will be able to find either here or on more further details on the Gresham Society website. Gresham Society is the sort of supporters club for Gresham College. If you like this sort of lecture, then you might enjoy Gresham College lectures. First, thank you to the audience for your interest and engagement. Second, and biggest thank you to Sacha and Ben. Lovely to see you. Thanks for giving up your time. I presume if you're in a hotel in France, then you're giving up your private time. So that's a special thank you. Thank you all, and goodbye.